What would you do if one morning bulldozers showed up on your private island and started tearing it apart without your permission? That's what happened to me. But this isn't just a story about solar panels or legal battles. It's about standing your ground, protecting your home, and proving that even one voice, backed by truth and determination, can bring down the most powerful HOA in the state. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. I had always dreamed of retiring to peace and quiet. So when I bought a modest home on a private island, a slice of heaven connected to the mainland by a small bridge, I believed my golden years would be spent tending to flowers, watching sunsets, and enjoying the soft rhythm of lake life. But all of that was shattered one morning with the roar of heavy machinery outside my bedroom window. The ground trembled as bulldozers crashed through my garden fence, tearing up the lawn I had carefully nurtured. I threw on my robe and rushed outside, heart pounding, only to witness a horrifying sight: workers in hard hats digging through my flower beds, knocking down saplings I'd planted with my own hands just last fall. I shouted, "Stop! You're on private property!" But they didn't even flinch. No explanation, no warning. Just destruction. Confused and frightened, I called the police. "There are bulldozers on my land," I explained. "They're tearing everything up." The officer on the other end sounded almost dismissive. "Sir, the Pinarest Point HOA has informed us they have permits for a solar installation project." That's when the fear turned into disbelief. Solar panels? On my island? My deed clearly marked it as private land, no shared access, no community rights. I had signed those papers myself, had them reviewed by my lawyer, and double-checked them before I ever set foot on this property. I quickly dressed and marched toward the construction site, where a well-dressed woman in heels and a blazer calmly observed the chaos from beside a black SUV. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why are bulldozers on my land?" She barely blinked. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Judith Palmer, president of the Pinarest Point HOA. We're installing 172 solar panels here as part of a community-wide energy initiative. Section 8. Paragraph 12 of the Community Covenant grants us access to waterfront property for community improvements." I felt the blood drain from my face. I remembered signing a mountain of paperwork when I closed on the house, but no one, not once, had said anything about this. I asked to see the covenant. She offered a polite, cold smile. "Of course, stop by the HOA office anytime, but the work continues." Behind her, a bulldozer crashed straight through my gazebo, the place where I drank coffee every morning with a view of the lake. That's when I realized something. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a power move, a calculated takeover. And unless I stood my ground, everything I had worked for, every peaceful morning and every inch of that land, would be gone. The next few days were a whirlwind of frustration and disbelief. I had hoped the chaos outside was just a misunderstanding, that surely no one could legally trample over someone's private land like this. But as I dug deeper, I found myself in a maze of confusing legal jargon, HOA overreach, and neighbors too afraid to speak up. My lawyer, Simon, finally called back after reviewing the documents Judith claimed gave the HOA permission. "There's something off," he said. "The clause they're using to justify access to your island appears to have been amended recently, but there's no record of the proper community vote or state registration. If that's true, the whole solar project might be illegal." That sliver of hope gave me the strength to keep fighting, but I soon discovered that not everyone welcomed my resistance. When I showed up at the next HOA meeting to raise my concerns, I was met with blank stares and tightly crossed arms. Neighbors I had waved to from across the lake looked away. Judith stood confidently at the podium, talking about tax incentives and energy savings. "Mr. Reynolds' island offers the best solar exposure," she said, glossing over the fact that the island wasn't part of the community's common property. When I stood up and asked why no one had asked for my consent, the room grew quiet. Karen, the HOA vice president, turned to me with a forced smile. "You signed the covenant when you bought your home? Perhaps you should have read it more carefully." I felt a chill settle in the room. A few residents looked sympathetic, but none spoke up. I realized they were afraid. One woman whispered to me after the meeting, My husband questioned a new HOA fee last year. A week later, our guest parking permit was revoked and our mailbox was mysteriously vandalized. The message was clear: speak out and you become a target. Back home, the sense of isolation grew. HOA trucks came and went without notice. New security cameras were mounted on the access bridge. Then came the fines. A notice arrived saying I owed $200 a day for unauthorized landscaping, the same flower beds that had been torn apart by their bulldozers. Judith was building a case to financially cripple me. Even at the community pool, I was treated like a stranger. A place I thought would bring me peace had turned hostile. I wasn't just fighting to protect my land anymore. I was fighting against a system that bullied, silenced, and manipulated. But I wasn't ready to give in. Something inside me, maybe pride, maybe the memory of my father who taught me to never back down, told me that even one voice, standing firm, could start to turn the tide. It was Eleanor, my kind neighbor from across the lake, who first planted the seed of suspicion that something deeper, more disturbing, was at play. She arrived one evening in her little fishing boat, eyes wary as she climbed onto my dock. "Judith tried to buy your island last year," she said softly. "The previous owner turned her down. Now she's got her sights set again. Only this time, she's using the HOA to do it." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The next morning, Simon, my attorney, confirmed that something was indeed off. The clause they're using to justify the solar panel installation, it was recently amended, he explained. But I checked the county database. There's no record of the vote required to approve that change, and it was never properly filed with the state. My heart sank. I had been so careful, so trusting. But they'd slipped a poisoned needle into the stack of papers at closing, hiding behind legalese in fine print. Later that day, a package arrived on my porch. Unmarked, no return address. Inside was a USB drive labeled, "For your eyes only." Suspicious but curious, I plugged it into my computer and clicked open a folder titled HOA Solar/Contracts. What I found made my blood run cold. Scanned documents showed that Judith's husband owned the construction company installing the solar panels. And Karen Matthews, the HOA vice president, her brother was awarded the maintenance contract for the next 10 years. The numbers didn't lie. The HOA had paid nearly 40% more than the industry standard for the project. That wasn't just poor budgeting. It was profit, funneled to friends and family under the guise of community improvement. I forwarded the files to Simon immediately. "This is real corruption," he said, "and if we can prove it was hidden from the community, the entire project could be invalidated." He encouraged me to keep digging. That night, I opened my grandfather's old journal again, looking for comfort. Instead, I found answers. Tucked between weathered pages of tree growth notes and soil acidity readings was a hand-drawn map, one that showed the original water flow systems running beneath the property. I realized then the solar panel installation didn't just invade my land, it disrupted protected wetlands. That was a state-level offense. The next morning, I filed a complaint with the state's Environmental Protection Agency, citing unauthorized construction on sensitive land. It wasn't just about preserving my peace anymore. It was about exposing a scheme designed to steal, profit, and cover it all up under the polite language of community planning. I stood by my window, watching as workers continued bolting panels into the ground, oblivious to what was coming. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel helpless. I had the truth. And the truth, when exposed to light, could be even more powerful than all 172 solar panels put together. The smell of burnt soil still lingered in the morning air, but beneath the ashes, something new was stirring. An idea, a quiet kind of resistance that didn't need lawyers or courtrooms. It needed roots, literally. The inspiration came from an unlikely place. My late grandfather's old leather-bound journal. I found it tucked away in a forgotten box in the attic, filled with hand-drawn maps, notes in fading ink, and pressed leaves from native tree species he had once studied. One page in particular caught my attention. It detailed how hybrid poplars and empress trees, planted side by side, could grow up to 12 feet a year in the right conditions. Fast, tall, and beautiful, he had scribbled in the margin. Good for privacy and shade. Privacy, shade, protection. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. That very afternoon, I took my little motorboat across the lake to Eleanor Wallace's cottage. Her garden was legendary in the neighborhood. Towering roses, flowering vines, and the healthiest saplings I'd ever seen. I showed her the page from my grandfather's journal. Her eyes lit up, and a sly smile crept across her face. "I've been growing hybrids like these for years," she said. "Come, I'll show you my greenhouse." What I saw inside gave me hope. Rows upon rows of thriving baby trees, strong and eager for earth. "I'll sell them to you at cost," she offered, "and I'll help you plant them. That HOA may think they own the sun, but they can't stop nature from growing." We loaded over 200 seedlings onto my boat that day. Each tree became a symbol, not of revenge, but of quiet defiance. If they wanted to invade my land, I would fight back not with threats, but with shade. Living, breathing shade. Under the cover of darkness, Eleanor and I planted the first row along the eastern shoreline. She brought her special fertilizer, an old mix of compost, coffee grounds, and something she called a little gardener's magic. We mapped out the sun's daily path and placed each tree with care, lining them up in rows that would, over time, become a wall of green to block the gleaming solar panels that had turned my paradise into a blinking eyesore. It wasn't just about the view anymore. It was about reclaiming something they thought they'd stolen. By the end of the week, all 200 trees were in the ground. I watered them every morning before dawn and whispered old stories my grandfather used to tell me as a boy. I know it sounds silly, but it felt like those trees were listening. They were mine. They were us. Of course, the HOA didn't stay quiet for long. Just days after the planting, Karen Matthews showed up uninvited, sunglasses perched on her nose despite the cloudy sky. "Those trees violate HOA landscaping code," she said, barely concealing her anger. I simply smiled and handed her a printed copy of the covenant. Section 5.7, I pointed. Homeowners may plant native vegetation for privacy and erosion control. These trees are native. This land is mine. She tried to hide it, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. I knew then. I had found the crack in their armor. They had power, yes, but I had roots, and roots, given time, always find their way. By the time the first leaves began to unfurl on my newly planted trees, the HOA had launched their counterattack. It started quietly. Yellow violation notices staked into my lawn like little flags of war. They fluttered in the spring breeze, warning me that I had just 48 hours to remove unauthorized vegetation or face daily fines of $500. Each tree, they claimed, was a violation. "Vegetation obstructing community infrastructure," the notice read in bold red letters. Infrastructure? My property wasn't a community resource. It was my home, my sanctuary. I stood there staring at those signs with a sick feeling in my gut. After all the digging, planting, watering, after all the hope I'd poured into those trees, they were trying to bankrupt me into submission. My hands clenched around the papers, and for a moment I could hear my grandfather's voice echoing from some long-ago memory. "Don't let bullies push you off your own land, son. Stand firm." I called Simon, my lawyer, and he confirmed the worst. They can't legally do this without a full board vote and proper notice, but you'd have to fight it in court to stop the fines. That takes time and money, two things I know you don't have a lot of right now. The very next day, a landscaping crew showed up without warning. I heard chainsaws before I even saw them. Racing outside, I found them standing beside my tree line, some already cut, some trembling as the wind caught their slender branches. "Stop!" I shouted, filming everything with my phone. One man, looking guilty, mumbled, "We were told this was HOA land." Another wouldn't meet my eyes. "Just doing our job, sir." I recorded the scene, heart racing. A white SUV idled on the access road. Karen Matthews, of course. Sunglasses gleaming, snapping photos of the destruction like a tourist at a crime scene. When she saw me noticing her, she smiled and drove off. That smile told me everything. This was no misunderstanding. It was deliberate. Then came the burn. A week later, just as the trees were beginning to recover, fire trucks pulled up to the shoreline. The HOA had filed for a controlled burn, citing fire risk from the newly planted vegetation. Fire risk from green, healthy saplings growing along a moist lakeshore. It made no sense, but they had a signed permit. The workers hesitated, some even whispering apologies as they started torching the smaller trees. I watched in disbelief, standing in the ash-smudged soil where my garden once bloomed, smoke curling up around my boots. It wasn't just trees they were burning. It was dignity, memory, legacy. I filmed every second. That night, my inbox lit up with an email from an anonymous sender. Attached were HOA internal memos and financial spreadsheets. One note read, "Trees must be removed before inspection next week per JP. Judith Palmer, the HOA president." It was a smoking gun, but it wasn't over yet. That same evening, I received a letter at my door. HOA fines had increased to $750 per day. No hearing, no discussion. Just cold, printed words meant to crush me financially. Still, I didn't give up. I forwarded the documents to Simon. I shared them with Margaret, the retired treasurer who'd flown back to join the fight. I even began reaching out to local reporters. If they were going to scorch the earth, I'd answer with sunlight, the kind that comes when you drag corruption into the open. They wanted war. I was ready for it. I thought I'd seen the worst the HOA could do, until I woke to smoke rising from my trees. It was early morning, the sky still bruised from the storm the night before. I stood on my porch, the scent of scorched wood clinging to the air, and my heart sank. My carefully planted saplings, those precious poplars and empress trees that had grown from hope and desperation, were burning. Flames licked up their trunks, cracking and spitting, as if mocking the time and care I'd poured into every root. I ran toward the shoreline, where a landscaping crew stood silently, chainsaws and torches in hand. One man looked down, shame in his eyes. Another wouldn't meet my gaze. But there was no mistaking the white SUV parked nearby. Karen Matthews, vice president of the HOA, reclined behind the wheel, camera in hand, documenting my heartbreak like a souvenir. "What are you doing?" I shouted, filming the chaos. "This is arson!" "We're conducting fire safety maintenance," one worker mumbled, voice uncertain. "It rained last night," I snapped. "These trees are green and thriving. You're not clearing brush. You're destroying life." But they didn't stop. I called 911, and when the fire trucks arrived, I showed the chief the videos. His face tightened. "No burn permit was issued for this property. This isn't just a mistake, it's criminal." As his crew doused the flames, I tried to steady myself, hands trembling from more than just rage. Back inside, soaked to the bone from rain and heartbreak, I sat on the floor of my grandfather's study and cried. Not just for the trees, but for what they represented. Peace, privacy, the fight to reclaim something that was rightfully mine. They hadn't just trespassed. They'd tried to erase me. That night, as thunder cracked again over the lake, lightning struck near the solar panels. A blinding flash lit up the night sky. The next morning, I found the main control box fried, wires melted, 30 panels cracked and tilted like broken teeth. It was nature's fury, poetic in its timing. But I knew the HOA would blame me, and they did. At 9 a.m., I received a new violation notice. Intentional sabotage of community property. $1,000 day fine pending investigation. My head throbbed, my palms shook. It was financial warfare, aimed at forcing me off the island without ever filing a formal eviction. But just as the weight became unbearable, a new email appeared. No subject, no sender, just one PDF file labeled Truth. Inside were damning photos. Karen handing an envelope of cash to Derek, the HOA maintenance manager. Another showed a typed directive signed by Judith Palmer herself. Remove all obstructing vegetation by any means necessary before county inspection. I gasped. They had ordered the burn. This wasn't negligence. It was sabotage, covered in official-looking paperwork. I forwarded everything to Margaret Thompson, the former treasurer turned whistleblower. Her reply was immediate. Get this printed. We present it at the next board meeting. I'll be there. The next morning, HOA residents received a mandatory meeting notice. The topic? Addressing island violations and homeowner misconduct. I knew it was a trap, but I was walking in with the truth. I'd been pushed, fined, threatened, and burned. But I wasn't leaving. Not now. They tried to torch my land into submission. But what they lit instead was a fire in me they'd never put out. The room was packed, wall to wall. Neighbors crammed shoulder to shoulder in the community center, eyes full of questions, unease, and curiosity. A makeshift stage stood at the front, flanked by Karen Matthews with her smug smile and Harold Jenkins, the HOA's nervous attorney. Judith Palmer was notably absent. Whispers floated through the room like wind through dry grass. People had seen the smoke, heard about the fire, maybe even heard rumors of financial foul play. I held my phone tightly, the damning evidence ready to show. It was time. Karen stepped to the microphone, trying to mask the tension in her voice. Before we begin, the board would like to address violations concerning unauthorized vegetation and solar interference. I stood up. Before you fine me for planting trees, the community deserves to know why they were planted in the first place. My voice was calm, but it carried. Karen tried to interrupt, but Harold raised a hand. The floor recognizes Mr. Reynolds. I connected my phone to the projector. The first image appeared, Karen passing a thick envelope to Derek, the maintenance head. Murmurs spread like wildfire, like the next photo, a typed order signed by Judith, stating clearly, remove trees by any means necessary before inspection. A collective gasp. This is the real reason my trees were burned, I said. And here's the law they broke while doing it. The final slide showed the missing covenant clause, Amendment 8.3, which stated any construction on private property required written homeowner permission and a 75% community vote. This clause was removed from the copy I was given when I bought my home. They doctored the documents. Just then, the back doors opened, and in walked Margaret Thompson, the retired treasurer, with a district attorney and 2 uniformed officers behind her. Gasps again. Karen turned white as a sheet. This is outrageous. The only outrageous thing, Margaret said firmly, is the level of corruption this board has covered up. These officers are here on behalf of the state attorney's office. Evidence of forgery, bribery, and illegal contracts has already been submitted. People stood from their chairs. Questions erupted. Some neighbors applauded. Others shouted at Karen, who was already backing away from the microphone. Then Eleanor Wallace, cane in hand, rose slowly and said what everyone was thinking. We were lied to. We were used. It's time for accountability. Karen tried to leave. One of the officers stepped forward. Ms. Matthews, you need to stay. And just like that, the house of cards came crashing down. Years of bullying, deception, and greed collapsed under the weight of truth. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply sat down and let justice speak for itself. 3 months after the storm, both literal and political, my island looked almost unrecognizable. The blackened stumps from the fire had given way to green shoots and thick-leaved saplings. The hybrid poplars and empress trees, stubborn and determined, had survived. Where HOA bulldozers once roared, birds now sang again, and the only flashing lights were the soft glow of lightning bugs at dusk. The solar panels? Gone. The HOA, under new leadership, voted to relocate them to the community center roof, where they should have been all along. They even issued a formal apology, read aloud by Margaret Thompson at the first open-door meeting in years. We failed you, she said, voice shaking just a little. And we're here now to rebuild. Together. And we did. With the HOA's funds unfrozen and fraud cases settled in court, a new transparency swept across the neighborhood. Weekly community gatherings replaced tense HOA meetings. People brought casseroles instead of complaints. For the first time in years, the air didn't buzz with suspicion, but with the sounds of kids playing by the lake, elders trading gardening tips, and laughter echoing from porches. One afternoon, Eleanor Wallace rowed her little boat to my island. Her arms were thin but strong, her eyes sparkling under the summer sun. "I brought something," she said with a grin, holding up a small potted sapling, "for the spot where the gazebo used to be." We planted it together, me kneeling in the soil, her steadying the roots. We didn't need to say much. The act itself was enough. Thomas Harrison, the once skeptical neighbor who tried to restrict my trees, came by next. He handed me a 6-pack of cold soda and a sheepish smile. "You were right," he said, "about all of it." A new sign was posted at the bridge to my island. Not an HOA notice, but a hand-painted one made by local school kids. "Welcome to Tree Haven, a place of peace, protection, and people who care." I'd never imagined my quiet island would become a symbol of something larger than myself, but here we were. Even the community rules changed. Every major decision now required 75% homeowner approval. Every meeting required open minutes. And, perhaps most importantly, every homeowner had the right to defend their land without fear. As I sat on my porch, watching neighbors paddle by in canoes and hearing the rustle of young trees in the breeze, I finally felt it. Peace. Not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of something better. Community, fairness, a return to values we thought had been lost. The HOA had once tried to bulldoze my garden and bury my voice. But in the end, it was the trees, the truth, and a little neighborly courage that brought us all back to life. And to think, it all started with 172 solar panels and a garden fence. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a man defending his property. It was a reminder of the values many of us were raised to uphold: honesty, perseverance, and standing firm in the face of injustice. For those of us who've spent decades building our lives, homes, and communities, watching someone try to take it all away, through deceit and intimidation, strikes a deep chord. But what this story proves is that integrity still matters, and it can still win. One of the most important lessons here is to never underestimate the power of ordinary people who refuse to be bullied. When institutions fail, and when those in power become corrupt, it's often the quiet, steadfast members of the community who bring the truth to light. It's a lesson that transcends age or background. When we see something wrong, we must speak up, even if it's difficult, even if we're standing alone at first. Another truth that shines through is the importance of knowing your rights and staying connected to your roots. The protagonist did not rely on anger or revenge. He used wisdom, documents passed down from his grandfather, and the natural landscape itself to restore justice. It's a powerful metaphor for life. Sometimes, the answers are already within reach. We just need to trust what we've learned over time. And finally, this story is a testament to the strength of community. It wasn't just one man versus the HOA. It became a movement of neighbors, elders, former officials, and even unexpected allies coming together to reclaim fairness and transparency. That's the kind of spirit we need more of today. As we grow older, many of us find strength in each other, in shared experiences, and in the wisdom we can pass on to the next generation. So if there's one takeaway here, it's this: never stop protecting what matters. Whether it's your land, your legacy, or your voice, stand firm. And remember, even when things seem hopeless, truth has deep roots. Like the trees that now shield that quiet island, justice may take time, but it always grows toward the light.